Hi, everyone. Welcome to A Happy Life. I'm Dr. Joshua Swift, professor of psychology at Idaho State University, licensed clinical psychologist, and author of Becoming Happy, a guide to self-care and holistic well-being. On today's episode, we're going to talk about the emotion of happiness. But before we get started, let me just remind you to hit subscribe or follow below so you never miss any of our future episodes. And please share with others. I want you to visualize for a moment what happiness means to you. Close your eyes just for a second, and I want you to picture happiness. Now, I imagine the picture that came to your mind probably had some unique elements to it. Maybe an image of a person, an animal, a setting, or object that brings you happiness. For me, it was a picture of my family and us hiking in the mountains. And with this picture, whatever it was for you, there were probably certain internal experiences or feelings that you noticed. Maybe a positive or pleasurable feeling of lightness, joy, and satisfaction or contentment. Now, while the exact things that bring us happiness can be unique, there's usually an overlap in the feelings that are associated with it. These common feelings are what we refer to as the emotion of happiness. So, exactly what is this emotion? Well, let's start with a definition of emotions in general. According to the American Psychological Association, emotions are a conscious mental reaction subjectively experienced as strong feelings, usually directed toward a specific object and typically accompanied by a physiological and behavioral changes in the body. Okay, so let's break that down. First, the American Psychological Association points out that emotions are something that we are conscious of. In other words, we as humans are usually aware of them. Now, we may not always have the words to label them, and we may not always understand them, but it is an experience that we are aware of. So, for example, in our body, there are a number of automatic processes that are always occurring. Sometimes we're aware of these processes, and other times we are not. So, right now, if you put your hand on your chest and you focus, you might be able to feel your heart beating and your lungs taking in air. You have become a conscious or aware of these physiological processes. But your heart was beating and your lungs were breathing before you started to pay attention to them. So these processes existed even without your awareness. Now, emotions are different. The act of feeling it or experiencing it is a necessary component for the emotion to exist. Again, we may not always pay much attention to it, but it is a felt experience that we have. The American Psychological Association definition also points out that it's a subjective experience. Different things make different people happy. We saw this at the start of today's episode. When I mentioned that the picture that came to my mind when I imagined happiness was a picture of hiking in the mountains with my family, some of you probably thought that you'd be miserable in a situation like that. And the image that came to your mind may not be something that would make me happy at all. So, isn't that interesting? Although happiness is a universal experience, something we can all have and something almost everyone desires, it's also an individual experience. In other words, your personal or subjective experience of happiness is something that's unique just to you. Now, last, the definition suggests that emotions are experienced at the mental, physiological, and behavioral level. Emotions such as happiness are experienced in our mind and in our thoughts. but there are specific neurological things that happen in our brains when we are happy. And those neurological events result in physical changes throughout the rest of our body. These can be changes in our heart rate, in our breath, in our facial expressions, in how we talk, and in how we want to act. Now, there is some debate among emotion researchers about how all these reactions fit together. Most researchers agree that when we are happy, we are anticipating some pleasurable or positive experience or outcomes. And this is based on comparing our current situation to past memories. So, in other words, happiness would be associated with some type of optimism and hope. And this is automatic. It's an automatic reaction at the subconscious level. But the ordering of what comes next is uncertain. Some say that this automatic anticipation results in physiological responses, which we then mentally interpret as being happy. So we feel it, and then we recognize, I must be happy. Others say that the mental realization comes first, and then that spreads through our body as a physiological response. So we think, I am happy, and in turn, our body has the experience of being that way. Now, this all happens so quick that it's hard to distinguish a temporal order to it. I do want to mention that there's one part of the American Psychological Association definition that I do not agree with. And I don't think the science supports it either. The definition says that an emotion is usually directed toward a specific object. So this implies that people experience an emotion because of a certain event or a certain situation. And this would be consistent with saying things like, so and so made me happy, or once I achieve such and such, then I'll be happy. While certain events and situations can trigger automatic memories, thoughts, and physiological responses, they don't determine our emotions. Instead, we have some control over our emotions. We can choose to be happy and work toward having that no matter what our situations are. Now, it doesn't mean that we'll never be sad or angry or experience some other type of non happy emotion. But we can build a life in which we have a consistent, general feeling of happiness that's not directed or due to a specific object, event, or situation. Now, happiness is considered to be a basic emotion. Basic emotions are foundational or fundamental ones that can be experienced on their own and also at times can be combined to make up other secondary or compound emotions. So, just like water is made up of hydrogen and oxygen, happiness, when combined with surprise, can result in awe or wonder. Or happiness, when combined with anger, might result in defiance or pride. Basic emotions are also thought to have various degrees or levels to them. So while euphoric, jubilant, delirious, ecstatic all might be seen as high levels of happiness, pleased, content, or serene might be seen as milder levels of happiness. Back in the 1960s and 70s, Dr. Paul Ekman, a psychologist at the University of California, San Francisco, suggested that there are basic emotions that are universal to all people. And he made this conclusion based on studies he and his colleagues conducted, where they showed pictures of different facial expressions to people and then asked them to identify the emotion that was being displayed. These pictures that they showed would have slight variations to the facial gestures, and then they were looking for consistent points where people would say it was one emotion and not another. So the basic emotions were the ones where there seemed to be universal agreement across participants as to what the expression was conveying. Now, this research is interesting, and it assumes not only the universality of some emotions, but also a universality in how they're displayed. And the second point has been contested and is a topic that we will discuss in a future podcast episode. But through this research, Dr. Ekman concluded that there are 6 basic emotions, including fear, anger, disgust, surprise, sadness, and joy or happiness. And over the years, others have added or removed emotions from this list. But through all of these adjustments that have been proposed, happiness or joy has always been included as a basic emotion. Early researchers on basic emotions also considered them to go in pairs, with happiness being the opposite of sadness. Now, of the 6 basic emotions, happiness is the only one that is almost universally considered to be a positive thing. So, this emotion is our mind and body trying to tell us that the situation we are in or the experience that we're having is pleasant or enjoyable. Now, I do say almost universal, considered to be a positive thing, because in some cultures, displays of happiness are discouraged or looked down upon. For example, some have suggested that in East Asian countries, seeking or experiencing happiness is actually a sign of selfishness, which should be avoided. However, this aversion can actually just represent a difference in beliefs about where one can find happiness. While those in Western countries might focus more on the pursuit of individual and personal happiness, those in East Asian countries might find a greater amount of joy, happiness, and satisfaction in social cohesion and group success. So I would say happiness is still desired in these countries. It's just obtained and displayed in a different way. Interestingly, there is actually a phobia referred to as cherophobia, which is a fear of happiness. It's believed that some people have this fear because they hold tightly to the idea that what goes up must come down. And so if they experience happiness now, some bad thing is going to happen in the near future. Based on this, though, I would also say that cherophobia isn't really a fear of happiness in and of itself, but it's a fear of the bad. And some people would prefer not to be happy now so they can avoid the sadness down the road. I'd like to finish our episode today on the emotion of happiness by going back to a point that I discussed earlier. I mentioned that there is not clear agreement in the field of psychology about what comes first, our mental experience of happiness or our physical experience of happiness. Interestingly, though, when it comes to our desires to improve or increase our levels of happiness, it may not really matter. In fact, research suggests that we can hack our happiness in both directions. On the one side, studies have shown that adopting certain physiological postures, such as holding a smile or standing in a certain way, can lead to the mental and emotional experience of happiness. In addition, studies have shown that purposely thinking happy thoughts can also lead to the physiological and emotional experience of happiness. Now, we'll talk more about both of these in detail in later podcast episodes. But for now, know that as you approach life in a happy manner, you can make yourself happy. You can make yourself experience more of this pleasant emotion. Well, thank you for joining us today on A Happy Life. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. If you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe or follow below to receive notification of all of our future episodes. You can also listen to past episodes by visiting our YouTube channel, which is linked below. And as always, please feel free to submit comments on topics that you would like us to address in the future. If you did find this episode interesting or useful, please share with others. Take care until next time.